I did a podcast with Grace Andrews from Diver CEO. It went viral on YouTube. If you really want your message to cut through, you need to think about your hero content and how you can easily repurpose that.
Today on Strategy Shorts, I'm joined by the most excellent Callum Mcdonnell. He is the founder of 7X Content, which are promoting and changing the game in the podcast space for some of the most popular podcasts on the planet. So Callum, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and what you're up to?
Yeah, so I'm Callum. I run a content agency called 7X Content, and we basically help podcasts get seen and listened to by making them social first. So we work with podcasts like High Performance, Diver CEO, loads of other leading podcasts. And our goal really is just to get them in front of as many people as possible. And we lean heavily on promotion through social media. So amazing clips, amazing trailers, amazing collaborations, because most people who create podcasts really struggle to find an audience for them because of the nature of the platform. And that's the problem that we solve for our clients.
Okay, so you've obviously mentioned a couple of big names there, like I said, some of the biggest podcasts in the world, Diver CEO being one of those. Could you just talk to us about how long you've been going as a business and how that relationship came to be? Because DOAC has exploded in the last few years. So I think our listeners and viewers will be really curious as to where 7X Content came from and how you built that bridge with one of the biggest podcasts on planet Earth.
Yeah, so basically I worked in startups for about 6 or 7 years, always around content. So working with media companies like the BBC, Disney, Fox, Red Bull. And so I loved content and media, but I was always working in kind of sales and marketing roles. And after about 7 years of doing that in startup land, I kind of burnt out and was tired of the culture that a lot of those companies kind of operate in, and really wanted to just do my own thing and get closer to working with content creators who I just love what they do and what they create and how they impact people's lives. And so I started dabbling with things on the side. And one of the things I started dabbling with was working with a couple of entrepreneurs. One of them was Lewis Morgan, who is a co-founder of Gymshark. And the other was a guy called Danny Buck, who runs Crafted, which are the fastest growing men's jewelry brand in the UK. And both of them wanted to either grow their personal brand or grow their podcast. And so I helped them do that by creating short form clips of the best moments. We ran them on their social pages and quite quickly just saw that the reaction to them was amazing. Like, these clips were popping off and they were driving a lot of growth on their Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And I thought, I've got something here. Why are podcasts not doing more of this? This is kind of like early introduction of Reels and TikTok, and no one had really jumped onto that yet. So I tested a bit more with Danny, and I tested with the startup that I was working at the time, which had 2 podcasts. Verified that this worked, verified that people would pay money for this as a service. And I thought, okay, I've got my first few customers here. I've got enough to start an agency doing that. How did the next iteration of clients come around? It was really through looking at, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to work with the best people. And the best people in this are probably, even though it was certainly at an earlier stage, at the point that I reached out, Stephen was definitely someone I earmarked as really high quality in his output. And so were Jake Humphrey and Damian Hughes, the High Performance podcast. And so the way I got to work with both of those people was just creating the content, sending it to them and saying, I think it'd be cool if you made more of these. Do you want to give it a trial for a month? And both of them said yes. And kind of the rest is history. I'll say for context as well that we don't work with Stephen anymore, and we only worked with him a little bit at the beginning, but have learned a lot through working with them and maintained a really good relationship with Grace Andrews, his director of marketing, who I think is phenomenal. But really the whole team and operation that they have there is showing what content can do for you, and just showing the opportunities to create media brands and podcast brands that take over the world, really.
I think for our listeners, we like to keep things really practical on the show, like give people things that they can take away and try. But I think even in your explanation there of creating something, like making the thing that you want to do and then sending it to your prospect and saying, look, I've already made it. Do you want more of it? Is such a great way to inbox people, rather than saying, oh, can we have a conversation? Like, could we reserve some time together so I can explain myself? Like, show your work, do the thing. I think that's already like such a great practical takeaway for the Strategy Shorts audience. And I'm glad you mentioned Grace Andrews as well, because I can't remember at what point I messaged you, but I know that I'd seen some of that short form content of an interview you did with Grace. And I think that's the reason, that's the point where I said, I want to talk to Callum and have a conversation with him for this show. And what I really appreciated is that you actually replied. And I want to say that for anyone who's like running a fast growing startup or in a business that's scaling, if you're getting people knocking on your door and saying, hey, can we have a conversation? When you can say yes or make room in your diary, please do, because not everybody's trying to sell you something. Sometimes we're just other startup founders who are trying to make some great content and serve our audience. So be like Callum if you're watching or listening today, because it's a really cool thing to do. Anyway, I know that you've been thinking about the practical stuff you want to bring to the audience today, like a tool or an insight or a framework, something like that. So why don't you tell us what that is? But before you kind of go into too much detail, let us know, who are you speaking to today? Who's your like ideal listener for this insight or idea?
Yeah, I've got a few things, and they probably all mold into one concept. But I'm really talking to marketers, content creators, people who are interested in creating high quality content and building loyal audiences. And there's a few different concepts here, but broadly speaking, I think one of the most powerful things about podcasts is the fact that you're creating this kind of one piece of hero content, which is the interview, where you can create immense depth of connection with your listener and the audience who listen to it and consume it at a level that is not competed with any other piece of content, right? Someone's going to listen to you for an hour once a week as a ritual, undisturbed. Like, you cannot get any stronger connection with any other piece of content that people are creating at the moment. Even a YouTube video, 10-minute YouTube video is only 10 minutes. A reel on TikTok is 60 seconds. So I think when you're thinking about content creation, think about what is like a hero piece of content, which could be a podcast, it could be something else, somewhere where you're creating like immense depth of connection with your audience. And then the framework that I love and that podcasts are really strong at is that you can then create strands of content from that piece of hero content at very little extra effort. So in the case of a podcast, it's obviously cutting it up into clips. So you might create clips that are relevant to LinkedIn that are 3 minutes in length. You might create clips that are relevant to YouTube that are 10 minutes in length. You might create clips that are 1 minute in length that are relevant to Instagram. But what's so powerful about that is one piece of content can turn into 50 pieces of content and 50 touch points with your audience. So that's a really powerful framework that we're using with our clients at the moment. And there are lots of other things that spin off and questions off the back of that we can maybe get into. But that's kind of the core framework that I really love at the moment.
Great. So why don't you kind of take us on a little journey, perhaps to one or two of those connected points? Because I think what you're saying so far is the importance of repurposing content and making sure that if you're creating something that you love, that has your investment and is inviting other people to invest in it with you, like really deep dive that thing, make that thing the best it can be, because it's going to carry on serving you. Because as you say, you can turn it into shorts, or you can turn, like if we were going to transcribe this interview, this could become an article, right? And there's going to be a bunch of different shorts that could come out of this piece of video content. So we're talking about repurposing, but yeah, dive into some of those, perhaps just one or two of those spin-off points that you've trailered for us there.
Yeah, so I think there are so many powerful things that this enables, but one of them is just pure efficiency, right? So I did a podcast with Grace Andrews from Diary of a CEO. It went viral on YouTube and garnered 200,000 views, which is amazing. It's awesome. I added 4,000 subscribers, hundreds of comments, leads for my business. And that would have been an amazing result on its own. But I then made short form clips for that for Instagram. One of them popped off and gave me 2.5 million views. That post alone added like 14,000 subscribers or followers to my page. It added 20,000 followers to Grace's page. And on LinkedIn, there's a similar story, like thousands of new connections from the content that I repurposed from that podcast, hundreds of messages, brands reaching out wanting to sponsor the podcast, brands reaching out wanting to work with me, people just saying they loved it and got a lot of value. So at really minimal extra effort, I've ensured that I've got an amazing piece of content, long form content where I've created lots of depth with people, but I've also then created other touch points on Instagram and LinkedIn where I can grow just as valuable an audience from shorter form repurposed content at minimal extra effort. And I just think, so many people sleep on this. You'll put a lot of effort into one thing like a podcast, and then you'll forget to actually promote it or repurpose it or think about where are the platforms where, again, this piece of content can have extra added impact. And I heard something fun the other day, which was like, imagine you pitched a brand on a TV advert and you said, we're going to spend 200K on a TV advert and you can just run it once. Like, they'd be up in arms, right? The brand that you're pitching to that. They'd be like, what are you on about? Like, what? We're not going to like serve this to our target persona multiple times over the festive period on ITV and then maybe run it on YouTube or wherever else they're going to run it, right? And I think people, content creators especially, don't take this kind of approach with their content. Like, you'll spend ages crafting the questions for your podcast or whatever it is, but then actually you don't squeeze all the juice out of the lemon, all the potential out of that piece of content. And another interesting spin on that is when you do have these immense successes, like those reels, for example, that popped off on Instagram, or that episode that popped off on YouTube, in 3 months' time, my audience will have forgotten about those reels. And I'll have forgotten about those reels as well. And so it's easy not to post them again. But actually, what a lot of smart people in social media are doing, and I was talking to the head of Ryanair's social, their kind of ex-head of Ryanair social, who grew their amazing TikTok channel recently. And one of the things he told me that was super interesting is that every time they had a banger, reel or TikTok, they would put it into a bank called the Banger Bank. And after the audience had forgotten about those bangers, like a month or 2 months later, they would just post them again. And so rather than just post something once and never use it because it's organic content and that's sacrilege, you can take your best performing stuff and just either reuse it or slightly change it and repost it. and over time create this bank of content, which is all viral hits. So there's another interesting thought for you.
So we've got two real big things here. One is the importance of repurposing your content and, really deliberately using your content, cutting it up, distributing it on different channels, and then also reusing. Pay attention to the analytics, what's working for you, and making sure that you flag those for use again in 3 months' time, because you will have forgotten, your audience has forgotten, everyone's forgotten. Yeah, you might as well sweat that investment. And as you said, making sure you get all the juice out of the lemon, so to speak. So we're coming into land now, and I'm just wondering for our audience, loads to think about, but if you were going to encourage the audience to tackle one thing or to take action against some of the things you've been saying as soon as they finish with this episode, where would you recommend they start? Like, what's the first action you think they should take?
There's a lot, but I would really think at the moment in the content that you're creating, what is that hero piece of content that you're making consistently? And if the answer is there isn't anything, then create something that creates a lot of value and deep connection with your audience or your community that you're building. And if the answer is that you actually have something already, I would think about how you can repurpose that effectively. And is there easy opportunities that you're currently not taking advantage of?
Callum, it's been awesome having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking some time out with us and giving us so much interesting stuff to think about and some results. You're speaking from a position of real authority in this space at the moment. And I know that you're busy with some of those viral hits that you've had recently. So thanks for just making a hole in your diary for Strategy Shorts. I so appreciate it. Let's speak again soon.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Loved it.